On this episode of the show, I have with me Rick Doten. He is a cybersecurity startup advisor and AI researcher, and we're going to be talking a little bit about, well, a lot of the AI tools we're seeing within the startup development market and how these dev teams are using them to build the products that they are and trying to get to production level code. And we'll talk about the cybersecurity implications and some of the AI concerns that Rick is seeing out there as he is advisor to startups, and got a lot to unpack. So Rick, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So obviously mentioned you're in cybersecurity, you're within AI, and you work with a lot of startups as an advisor. And we're going to talk a little bit broadly initially about cybersecurity within the development process, but we're going to speak to maybe a more niche focus of where startups are when they are starting to leverage some of these, AI assisted development tools. And it's funny is originally I used to call them something, and then the name changed and I called them something else. And now I'm just going to call them AI assisted tools because I don't know by the time somebody hears this in 6 months what we'll call it.
Right.
So, and it's interesting because I am seeing a lot of engineering leaders dive in and start using these tools to do things. And these things are wide and they're all over the map. The one thing that I don't necessarily hear a lot about is the concern about the cybersecurity components, right? The various, the attack surface has exploded with us using LLMs, and within the dev process, they're even potentially more impactful. So I guess looking at the top, when you're looking at the landscape of startups and you're seeing the companies pulling these tools to gain more efficiency, where are they on the spectrum of thinking about the cybersecurity implications of AI generated code?
Yeah, it's a range. If you have startups who came from the AI side and then are now looking to apply it to a security application, as opposed to folks who grew up in the security realm and then they're now leveraging AI to assist them. I call it the bottom end of the range is kind of putting the sticker on the box saying, yes, we use AI in our platform. And it could just be connecting to an LLM and having it do some assisting with that. When we talk about coding with AI, I break it into two pieces. One is probably you're referring to as vibe coding. And vibe coding is non-developers leveraging AI through prompting to come up with an application, where I am also using the term AI assisted development, where developers are using AI to become more efficient. There is a Stanford study from earlier this year that talked about the real efficiencies of coding with AI. And it talks about if you look at just the basic how many lines of code it can write, it's 30 to 40% more effective than a human. But there's a lot of reworking of it. And, there's a lot of context that needs to be applied to it and a lot of changing it, which kind of gets it down to like 15 to 20%. And that's only with the modern languages and basic things and stuff that it knows. As it gets more complicated and gets to be more obscure languages, it actually becomes counterproductive. And so the other element of that is the implementation of the architecture and where they use MCP, for example, and how they implement MCP in managing agents, if they are even using agents, so there's realms of it from the code production standpoint, from the architecture standpoint, and then the use of a model of some sort in the platform itself.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is there's a lot of tinkering going on. From tinkering, things are moving and progressing where people see improvements and benefits from AI-assisted development tools. And greenfield typically works better. Some people are now making brownfield work. Again, I think we're seeing a lot of different areas. When you are seeing, especially startups who necessarily don't have a devoted cybersecurity resource, or they haven't gotten there in the maturity, right? So that we could have, it could be tons of others, but in this case, assuming somebody doesn't have necessary cybersecurity experts in-house, And if they are using these AI assisted development tools, are there low hanging things that they could be leaving themselves exposed to without knowing it in the eagerness of trying to push code out with this or try to get code to work with this?
No, absolutely. And thank you for following up because I never answered your question. I kind of started with the baseline and then I realized I'm talking too long. I should stop. And so, yes, one of the challenges in AI assisted code is if we're going to put in the context, there's a short-term memory. There's not a lot of tokens that you're dealing with. And so you can't just say, here's the BSIM rules. Here are my coding standards. Here's my architecture. Here's my security architecture for this platform. Now, let me explain to you what I want you to write because it's going to forget all that. And, so how do we get that injected throughout in smaller pieces? And the other challenge in AI assisted code, and I've come around on this for 2 years when people said, what are we doing about secure coding with AI assisted code? And I said, it's third party code, whether some offshore developer, some third party library, or I get it off the, off of Reddit. Third party code's third party code. We for decades have had a process of reviewing it and doing it and all that kind of stuff. My mind has been changed recently. And I was talking to a startup actually who was looking at this problem. And I said, and I kind of waved my hand. And they said, well, there's some reasons why I think that it's important. And one of it is, and the most important one of the many reasons is that AI is not like humans in developing code. It is not lazy like humans and more efficient, we'll just say. Because if I put back and say, hey, limit the variables you can put in this field so you don't get cross-site scripting, a human are like, oh, okay, let me add in these little things and that's all the day. AI will just rewrite everything and then add that. And then they may move stuff around. And they may, because you didn't put in the context, it may forget a module because you didn't mention that when you said fix this thing and that module's gone and you broke it. And so you have to really scrutinize everything every single time. So, we haven't even gotten to the part of talk about security yet because we're talking about quality. Code quality is such a huge thing, just like data quality is in AI analytics, right? Code quality is so important. But the other thing in that is understanding the architecture, which APIs I use, what kind of accounts I use. I use non-human accounts for these things. I use human accounts for those things. For my database access, I use, 3 accounts, one for read, write, one for modify, or I use individual one. It's like all these different things are like context you kind of got to put in. So yes, you still need, if you have a good SDLC security life cycle, you will catch all those things when it kind of gets in to that life cycle. In the CI/CD pipeline we're developing, where we're checking all these gates if you have a mature one. Now, coming back to startups, they have a handful of people, they are writing code, they may be doing some quick things. They just want it to work first, and then they're going to add it second, unless they came from an application security background. So we still need to make sure that there are all of the basic things that OWASP has, that BSIM has, that are handled for when doing that. And I would say, again, it's a mixed bag of how many are actually doing it or not.
It's interesting because startups are known to want to run fast. I mean, it's part of...
Yeah. Particularly get that minimum viable product. It's like, I want it to work first and we'll find a C and then we'll secure it later, which no harm, no foul.
Absolutely. So I see the big drive to wanting to get to that MVP or add features quickly. I mean, that is the holy grail for a startup. And you mentioned some people might not necessarily have the resources from a application security perspective in-house to know. And you don't know sometimes what you don't know. And sometimes you do know what you don't know. And you're still like, hey, I need to get this out. With the amount of code that can be generated and potentially tweaked, adjusted, shipped, are there vulnerabilities within that dynamic of if you're not accounting for some of the things that you mentioned as this code keeps building and growing? Could there be vulnerabilities in that expanded code base because you just at some point are not going to be able to go through and remember and decipher what was AI generated or AI assisted versus, hey, this is what we wrote ourselves before?
Yeah, and that's one of the other reasons why AI generated code is different than just having a team of humans write the code, because the volume. right? If I can have humans write 100 lines of codes in a sprint, we'll just say, and AI can now do 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 lines of code in a sprint, then my process for doing all of my secure SDLC is now saturated. And, even the licenses for things, the number of lines, it's, so that's kind of another reason why it's a little different, is the volume can be more. And to your point, just the process may be that I miss some things. Now, as you were talking, I was also thinking about, when I talk to a lot of startups, they do a good job of having, their friends, third-party pen test team. They have things that look at their platform before they go out, and they know the importance of securing it when it becomes something that is a release. And maybe within the design partnership, they were experimenting with things with some of their design partners, and it may not be perfectly secure at that point, but it's, not production yet. But when they get to it, then they kind of, like, as you said, as you talked about before, let's make sure everything is locked down. But as we know, doing the security at the end, may miss some things in the middle that we wanted to get. And that's potentially an issue. But I also can't emphasize enough the potential complexity of the architecture and of the platform. When we talk about agentic AI and security, I always refer to 2005, when we went from web applications being a web server application server database to service-oriented architecture. And we had different content servers, different APIs, taking to different, front ends. We have identities coming from different places, and is more distributed. And I was running ethical hacking teams at the time, from the late 90s to late 2000s. And it was a field day for us because we're poking at all these kinds of things because the surface area increased. We hopefully in 20 years have understood this in a service-oriented architecture and API-based architecture. But I still have a application security training program that I wrote up in 2002 to train some of the bank customer developers that we were doing all the pen testing for, that I could probably still use that training outline today because we keep doing the same things over and over again.
And that's interesting. And I guess when you're looking at, these startups, and you mentioned obviously some of this is happening later from a security perspective, which has implications. Are there a couple of essentials if somebody doesn't have a security expert on staff or within their realm, and they're doing this a little bit afterwards? Are there a couple things that they should be looking at minimum, just to reduce complexity down the road?
Yeah. And I will say I'm kind of biased because I'm only, advising cybersecurity startups. They all kind of come from this world. They may not be from the application side, but they kind of understand that over above than someone who's doing just some basic robotics or something like that. So I would say yes. Obviously, the classic ones, and I had mentioned already, OWASP, BSIM, the safe security, that there are ones that are just the application security, as I kind of mentioned, has not really changed the fundamentals of what we worry about. We worry about, the identities, we worry about tracking sessions, we worry about data protection, we worry about, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery. We, making sure that logouts are complete. We make sure that, there's no way to escalate privilege. There's all these things that still apply for decades that still apply. There might be some nuances in AI that may be drifting, in their intents. And that's a whole other discussion, when agents are autonomous and they do things. And we wrote a white paper about AI ethics that talks about this. But, the fundamental of the platform level is really 95% the same as that we'd be dealing with anything else, any other application, traditional infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, when we start thinking of, I had somebody tell me, within text emojis now, that, if you're dealing with a prompt injection, that you might invariably be copying and pasting parts of code or something that you might not be aware of into your development, and all of a sudden you might get some unexpected results. Something as subtle as that, I think a lot of startup dev teams, engineering teams, they probably were aware of some of the basics that they have to be concerned about, but some of the new stuff that's coming out, and because we're still such an early phase of building muscle memory, I mean, there's a lot of things that we just maybe are not aware that could potentially be. And that attack surface area, as it is expanding, the adversarial side is learning more and more how to use these tools. So it's interesting is while we're trying to learn as from
absolutely
the good actors to use the tools and improve our productivity, the bad faith actors are leaning to the tools on the flip side to exploit these, which is
and improve their productivity as well. Yes.
And their productivity as well. I mean, that we already had it difficult with just dealing with what we had. I mean, if you were to kind of put in some type of ramification base, how much more complex did things just get with this?
I don't think it's as much as we are afraid of. But what I will say to your point about, yes, the adversaries are using it to be more efficient, is that, and as we are trying to be more efficient, it's going to start widening the gap of the haves and have-nots. One of the first things I say to every single startup I talk to is like, you need to remember you need to understand it's not one market you're selling into. There's the Fortune 500, then 5 million other companies. And that's just here in the US. And that 99% doesn't have all the resources and things to be able to do things. And they're just trying to keep their head above water. And the larger, well-funded, well-resourced companies are using AI to leverage security operations, for using vulnerability remediation, for doing it for, GRC and making sure their partners are they're doing more real-time things for identity observability and tracking all of the non-human accounts and all these different things, while the 99% is going to trail farther and farther behind as the adversaries get better at being able to take them out. And that gap is getting wider and wider. And that's the big thing that worries me. I like to work I'm a social coordinator for my CISO community here in Charlotte. So I deal with everyone from the big banks down to small companies. We had a big conference here yesterday when I spent a lot of time with my friends. So I have great insight into what all of their, personal realities are of what they're dealing with and what they can handle. And I worry about it from a macro view. And from a security standpoint, the availability is so critical. The resiliency is so critical because, as a former CISO and virtual CISO, I am part of the business, and it's about business risk. And yes, we can compromise accounts, and yes, we can compromise data, and yes, we can steal things, but we need to still make money. And if I can't, sell things, produce things, move things, pay people, whatever, then I'm not making money. And that's the business impact. And so I'm always very much looking at the overall business impact. And so the worry for me, and I want to say from a complexity standpoint, but from the newness, is we're going to have a more fragile environment that we're not sure how to make sure that it is resilient for some of the reasons we talked about and some more reasons that we haven't talked about yet.
And maybe, actually, good thing to maybe follow up. And some of those reasons that we haven't mentioned, can you maybe go over some of those for us?
Sure. A lot of times when I'm talking to startups, I'm like, well, I'm interested in their implementation. Are you just pointing to a large language model? Did you make your own domain-specific model or small language model? Are you learning things on your way? How they're in place? Because because the other element is that some of the more highly regulated industries, their regulators don't like black boxes. And so like, hey, if you're just doing a public element, we're never going to implement that. It's like, oh, we have our own private one. Well, okay, what's the interpretability and transparency of that? Can you give me that? It's like, well, we don't know. Like, all right, well, they're not going to like that. So those kinds of things being one. How is the model that they're using implemented if it's part of the platform? Two, I'd mentioned MCP. And MCP has kind of been put, the model context protocol, which was this great boon to be able to make it easier to be able to distribute agents and control agents. But a lot of people who don't understand its architecture may use it as a portal and saying it's like, oh, well, it's the communication between the LLM and all of the agents and the agent, and it can, be this, and I also kind of refer to it going back to 2005. We had, Microsoft had SOAP. We had XML over RPC. That was our service-oriented architecture. MCP is literally JSON over RCP. So a lot lighter weight than XML and a lot more portable than XML and more, used by more things. But there's still latency to it. And so if you're forcing everything through that, then you're going to get compounding latency. Instead of just having it as a controller to be able to check things, to be able as a coordinator, to be able to check out of band kind of stuff while your agents are directly talking to all the tools and services and all the things it needs to instead of routing back through it. So again, going to the fragility and the availability and the resiliency of these platforms, because I need it to work for the business. And yes, I'll make sure it's secure. And we have, again, as we've mentioned, lots of tools to be able to verify that that is true to an acceptable level. But I, therefore, more worry about the resiliency of it, that if they implemented it poorly, you're going to hit a diminishing return and it's going to start failing, or things are going to drift into a position I didn't expect it to, because I wrote an article called the painted fence analogy of if my agents start deciding they want to do something else because they think it's more important to the mission and start, consuming more resources than you expected it to because you didn't put in the guardrails, or start escalating privilege because it can't do something to figure out how to do it. It's doing what you ask it to do, but you didn't put the guardrails in. Those are the things that I think are the new things that I don't think that everybody fully understands.
Absolutely. And, I think the one thing that's really interesting is, the actual development, the engineering development process right now. It is still as it's been, but as we see more of these tools and we see more engineering teams head there and try to leverage them and try to enhance productivity, I can't help to think we're starting to re-envision the process itself. And you mentioned, are you doing cybersecurity early enough within the window? And, obviously if you have more time or less responsibilities writing code, maybe you can actually devote some of those looking at different places. I mean, is there a world where we have to maybe re-examine the process where cybersecurity fits in if we're going to use more AI-assisted dev tools?
Yes, but I also think that it's an opportunity, right? Is that, there's some new platforms that are leveraging AI that are doing great things like threat modeling. AI is great for threat modeling, right? For assisting some of these things, again, improving efficiency, because it's very good at, I was on another podcast a few months ago talking about AI pen testing, where when I run teams, it's all right, there's 65,535 ports and I run Nmap on it. I got to wait for it to kind of scan each one. I can have 4 of them to break it up. But what if I have 65,535 scanners, each going after one point individually at the same time? Boom. Like when war dialing, right? How many lines do you have to be able to dial at once? That efficiency is really going to help. And I think that's an opportunity for us. The use of an AI assisted IDE, and being able to, and also I was talking to somebody just yesterday, they said, yeah, we're trying to have it update GitHub with all the things, but we say every time you have a change, post it to GitHub, every single letter was a change. And they're like, okay, we DDoSed ourselves. Now let's correct that and be more specific, right? It's the old story. It's the old elementary school practice describing how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Don't just put the peanut butter on the bread because the jar just goes on the loaf of bread. And so but these are all things we can work on. There's solutions for, but it's these are things we need to kind of work out. And I think there's opportunities to be able to improve that, and what that SDLC now looks like, and how deep the CI/CD pipeline goes with it. Because we're talking about development now, but are we going to have it do infrastructure as code? I don't know. Are we going to have it doing monitoring the containers and monitoring the identities and monitoring things? Because a lot of these identity management tools, identity posture management, the container posture management, data posture management, they're kind of leveraging AI as well. It's how far down do we want to go? And then, we haven't really talked about vibe coding, where the non-developers using things, there's going to be a tremendous amount of shadow AI code, which we kind of had in the cloud world with SaaS tools and no code, low code. In even a large organization that may have a very mature application security program, the operation is going to update Salesforce and have somebody else do the updates for that. HR is going to update Workday. Somebody in IT is going to update, ServiceNow with some no code, low code things that's outside of my SDLC that I have all this rigor in. And I need to what have you introduced? Because you're calling my identities, you're accessing my data stores, but we've kind of been carved out of that. So now imagine with vibe coding and some marketing person decides to stand up a website and collect data from things and all kind of from their end users or something and put it somewhere and be like, well, where did this come from? We have a rigor for that you now just completely avoided. So those are other things that I kind of think about in this process. Is we made it more accessible for people to do development, I guess is what I'm saying.
And you know what that is? Yeah, obviously you mentioned vibe coding, which is only going to grow. I mean, we had low code, no code solutions. Vibe coding is the next step, the next evolution. You will put the power of development into the hands of people that might not have had that experience.
Right. Or know any of the things that we've just been talking about.
Yes, and that's a whole different
whole other podcast. But I'm saying that world exists along this world. Yeah. While we are talking about this is also exists, and we can't ignore it.
Absolutely. All right, I 100% agree with you. We might have to do a follow-up episode to talk about that other side of the world, Rick. And I was going to ask you, if somebody does have a question, I know we talked about a couple different areas here, but if somebody does have a question within the context that we spoke about, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Easiest way on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, and I do lots and lots of talks and things, so I'm very active on there. I also have a YouTube channel, Rick Cybersecurity Videos. I'm on the editorial panel for the CIS Critical Security Controls, and I made 18 videos of all of the 18 critical security controls for version 8, 4 years ago. And we're about to kick off development of version 9. And I did that because I felt bad about how much we changed it. It was 20, we got rid of 3, we added 1, we moved some stuff. So I said, let me make videos to talk about what we did, why we changed it, what we did. And then I have some other videos on there that I haven't updated in a while, but those are the 2 best ways.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's a lot of content out there. And Rick, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, I think we talked about especially for startups and the implications of security when you're using these AI-assisted coding tools. So hopefully an episode you can share with somebody else who's in the engineering space that could benefit from it. I don't think you have to just be in a startup. I think this content was good all the way around. Also, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.